More people are killed in ethnic violence in southeast Kenya, raising fears of more conflict in the run-up to the presidential election. Politicians stand accused of fueling the anger to push their own agendas. And analysts are warning the polls could destabilise East Africa's biggest economy. Hello there, I'm Shiulie Gosh. You're with Inside Story. Tribal violence has killed 19 people just 2 months before presidential elections. Fighting between the Pokomo and Orma tribes broke out in southeastern Kenya last week, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. The UN says hundreds of people have died in a cycle of killings since the beginning of last year. And observers say it's politicians who are stirring up tribal rivalries for political gain. As Peter Grester reports from Kenya's Tana River Delta.
This is the story of a neighbourhood feud, of two angry communities living side by side but almost never able to agree. Last week, Orma tribesmen stormed the Pokomo village of Kibuso, hacking victims with machetes and setting homes on fire. 11 people died here, including Joshua Mwampa's grandmother, mother, son and nephew. All perished in the flames.
The government abandoned us. We blame the government because we told them the attack was coming, but they did nothing.
The latest cycle of attacks began 6 months ago. The reasons are disputed, but one politician has been charged with inciting violence to drive opposition voters out of his constituency ahead of elections in March. A government inquiry has named several others. They've all denied the allegations. These attacks were well organised. Somebody recruited the fighters, made a plan, issued the orders. And the communities are organised in such a way that it couldn't have happened without the say-so of someone very senior. So what people here are struggling to understand is why the authorities still haven't been able to find them and hold them to account. The failure of justice seeped into every impassioned speech at a meeting that the Red Cross hoped might end the violence. Over the weekend, community leaders agreed to a joint gathering, but only one tribe, the Pokomo, bothered to show up. So the Red Cross head, Abbas Guled, went to the Orma anyway. He was met by a community heavily armed and in no mood to talk.
We want our leaders to come here and brief us about what's going on. Only then will we listen to anyone else.
That profoundly entrenched bitterness has the Red Cross chief deeply worried about the coming elections.
We know that Tana River over the last 20 years, there's always been a pre-election violence, but not this madness. This time is just sheer, out of all proportions.
The injured from both communities are still recovering in hospital. 52% of Shukrani John's body is burned. He too is depressed about the future. I don't think this war will end, he says, because every time someone gets hurt, they take revenge.
Let me introduce today's guests now. From Nairobi, Salim Lone. He's an advisor to the Kenyan Prime Minister Raila Odinga and author on Kenyan affairs. Also in Nairobi, Kipchumba Murkomen. He's a Senate candidate for the United Republican Party led by William Ruto. He's also one of Mr. Ruto's advisors. And in London, African affairs author Michael Amoah. Welcome, gentlemen, to all of you to the programme. Salim, let me start with you, because Raila Odinga has said that he doesn't foresee a repeat of the kind of violence that we saw after the 2007 elections. But this kind of violence is already happening, isn't it?
Well, it is happening, and of course we have never seen a violence at this scale before any other election, and there are very real worries that it could keep escalating. Even the Inspector General of Police, the brand new Inspector General of Police, has said that this is very political. So there are real worries, and it is important for the Prime Minister and all other candidates to emphasize that it is not a foregiven that we will have violence. We must all talk about there should be and will be no violence. But I also want to say that this violence is not just intrinsic to Kenya. I mean, ever since the end of the Cold War, and when we had multi-party democracy here, like in Kenya, elections were handed over to the President Moi, for example. But as soon as democracy was introduced in 1992, he now had to win votes. And one of the terrible things he did was he introduced deep ethnicity in pre-election times and after the election so that he could intimidate and divide his opponents. So that's the essence of how it began in Kenya, but it is not just a Kenyan phenomenon. All over the world, beginning with Yugoslavia, after the end of the Cold War.
But in this case, we've got people clearly blaming the government for failing to prevent the violence and politicians being linked to the violence, and yet no one is being held to account.
Yes, it is absolutely, it's awful, you know, to see young children, mothers being killed, grandparents, as we just heard. It is truly awful, and the police need to do much more, the intelligence need to do much more. It's a mystery. You know, we have had 200 people killed in massacres, not in small individual incidents, and 50 policemen, armed policemen, have been massacred. So this is just unprecedented. It's nerve-wracking, it's unnerving, and we really want this to stop, and the government must do more. There's no question of it.
Kipchumba, I can see you nodding in agreement there. Is William Ruto worried about the violence that's happening now? Is he worried about the prospect of more post-election violence?
First of all, I want to agree with Salim Lone that you know, this issue should not be condoned. But I need to put us in historical perspective that if you see in Kenya, the place, the Tana River where the violence has occurred, is part of the counties or the places of this country that are marginalized. The other place that occurred was Baragoi, which was marginalized. The other place that violence occurred is Turkana, which is marginalized. There is something about marginalization and violence in this country, the places that have been left out. The reason why policemen are saying they are unable to reach and stem out the violence in those areas like Tana River and Baragoi the other day is because the area is inaccessible. For the last 50 years since independence, these are areas which have not been opened up. There are no roads, there is no economic development. The people are still living under barbaric regimes. These are also nearly border counties, and the security is poor. We in URP and William Ruto as a lead of URP and in our manifesto, one of the things that has been identified is the equipping the police, being able to retrain them, giving them the necessary equipment, but also over and above that is that stemming out or dealing with marginalization is one way of stemming out violence from these areas. So I think it is something that concerns us.
But should politicians like yourself be doing more? Should politicians like yourself be doing more to stem this kind of violence, to educate people into saying that, you know, ethnic divides should not be causing this kind of conflict?
It is not enough to just say it. I mean, our candidate, Honorable Ruto, said it over and over again. But our main concern is that those who have had the opportunity to lead this country, to be in office, the likes of the Prime Minister and the President, should have done more to deal with marginalization in these areas and open up the area to be accessible. Because, I mean, you want to tell me that you have a place like that where policemen, like Salim Lone was saying, I mean, like in Baragoi, 50 policemen were killed. I mean, that is shameful. We need to be able to deal with the question of accessing those areas, but equipping also the police. And that is why we are seeking opportunity to serve in this country as a party so that we can be able to deal with these systemic issues of marginalization.
It's interesting that William Ruto is a Kalenjin, isn't he, from the Kalenjin tribe. In the last election, some of the worst conflicts were between the Kalenjin and the Kikuyu, Mr. Kenyatta's tribe, and yet you've managed to form an alliance. How far will that go towards stopping more conflict, do you think?
Well, I think, of course, this alliance is not just basically to be able to deal with that conflict, but to a great extent, when people realize that their leaders are capable of working together, it will reduce that kind of desire for people to fight in between themselves as communities. What we witnessed in 2007, we are expecting that it will not happen again in Rift Valley and other parts of the country, but the security management team must do better in this country. William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta have done their best to demonstrate that despite the fact that people say that Kalenjins and Kikuyus cannot work together, they have shown that, and particularly William Ruto has shown that he could be able to shelve his political ambitions and work and work with Uhuru Kenyatta as his running mate.
Okay. Michael, we know that the clashes in Tana River are being mirrored across Kenya. Why did tribal divides play such a big role in Kenyan politics?
Well, I mean, essentially, I mean, even in Kenya, the tribal distribution is not as acutely skewed as some other countries. But I think in recent times, one of the reasons why the tribal clashes have become so acute is actually because of the history from the 2007 elections, when William Ruto on the other side and Uhuru Kenyatta on the opposite side, both were instrumental in actually organizing and orchestrating tribespeople to fight against each other in the post-election violence. And it's actually interesting to know that they planned these attacks before the election, anticipating that out of the electoral outcome that these violence should be staged. And that has somehow polarized some tribes against the others. So that's the sort of background to these ethnic clashes. I mean, the recent one we've just talked about between the Pokoma and the Oma is not political, in that the Pokoma, who are actually cash crop growers, are in some sort of land disputes with the Oma, who are actually cattle grazers. And the issue is about access to land and water for cattle. However, the timing of it is political because we're just 2 months or 2.5 months to the election, as well as the fact that the powers that be, the state, have not been able to actually prosecute or actually deal with this particular violence that erupted, even though they were warned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just before we go on, Michael, because you talked about those who were accused of orchestrating the last lot of violence, let's just have a look at more background to that. Many fear that the latest violence could escalate ahead of the presidential election in March. And Kenyans haven't forgotten about the last time elections brought blood to the streets. Now, back in 2007, supporters of President Mwai Kibaki fought with his opponents over his return to power. About 1,500 people were killed, 600,000 people were displaced in the worst crisis to hit Kenya since independence in 1963. Now, the International Criminal Court has now indicted 4 men, including Deputy Prime Minister Uhuru Kenyatta and his running mate William Ruto, for crimes linked to the post-election violence. Michael, it will seem incredible to many outside the world of Kenyan politics that 2 of the very men who were wanted by the ICC for orchestrating some of that violence we saw in 2007 are now running for the leadership in the country.
Yes, this sounds very ridiculous. Well, quite apart from the political ambitions of Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, for that matter, I think the one main reason why they are running for office is actually so that when they win, or if they win, they can invoke immunity against the ICC charges. So there is quite an ulterior motive there.
Okay, well, let's put that to Mr. Ruto's advisor. Kipchumba, is Mr. Ruto going to cooperate with the ICC?
Absolutely. Honorable William Ruto was the first person, when he was accused, even before his name was made public, who was willing and communicated clearly to ICC that he was willing to cooperate. He actually believes that, some of the charges, all the charges against him are trumped up, and that his innocence can only be proved in such a court if the court is going to be fair, and therefore there is any reason why he would not cooperate with ICC.
Well, the ICC trial is slated for April, isn't it? About a month after the election. If William Ruto is elected to a leadership role, are you saying he's not going to seek immunity?
No, he cannot. And I mean, why should he seek immunity considering that the trial is ongoing? And we all know that, I mean, even if he was to attempt to seek immunity, that will not stop the trials from going on. And for a person who strongly believes in his immunity, I mean, in his innocence, I don't think there would be any reason why he's trying to run away from the trial.
Salim, what's your view on these ICC indictments? I mean, clearly these are Odinga's political rivals, but does it complicate an already volatile period?
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the reasons this election is so polarized is because there is an ethnic base to them. I mean, in Kenya, historically, not necessarily because the ICC, when a leader is accused, his community, his ethnic group, his tribe, feels that they're under attack. And what we have seen is when the charges are as grave as the ones from the ICC, that the communities of Mr. Ruto and Mr. Kenyatta feel that this is a foreign plot. Sometimes they think it's a plot by the Prime Minister to get them out of the political realm. Obviously, it is polarizing people, but it doesn't have to. And there are two other points I want to make. If the President and the Deputy President, if they become so, Mr. Ruto and Mr. Kenyatta, if they go to The Hague, how will this country be run? They're not appearing in The Hague for a day or two at a time. They have to spend a considerable amount of time there. But be that as it may, the other very important point I want to make is Kenyans are not by nature hostile to other communities. As recently as 10 years ago, in the very important 2002 election, the first one after Moi's rule, the two leading candidates were both Kikuyus, and there was no violence anywhere. No tribe or tribal group said, how can we have two Kikuyus running for one office, the head of the country? And in fact, each of the two Kikuyu candidates, Mr. Kibaki and Mr. Kenyatta, got more votes from outside their tribe than from within. So we should dispense with this notion that we are deeply ethnic people. These ethnic ties are being politicized in order to gain political, meet political ends.
Okay,
but in addition, I should also mention that politics is not the only issue.
Yeah, I will come on to the other issues. I just want to ask one question about Kenya, if it doesn't, because Kenya is a signatory to the Rome Statute, which of course set up the International Criminal Court. Yes. Is Kenya prepared to risk sanctions and isolation if it doesn't comply with the ICC indictment against Ruto and Kenyatta?
Oh no, I mean absolutely. You know, this is what I believe very strongly, that even though Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta and Mr. William Ruto have not been proved guilty, and they might very well be innocent, their running for office and potentially winning could totally isolate Kenya. I mean, there'd be an immense impact immediately on our businesses, leave alone everything else. Our name, I mean, if the leaders are serving here and cannot travel anywhere, no, the impact on the economy will be huge. And ours is an economy which is highly open. It's a very internationalized economy. We trade and deal with the world. We are a very open society. So it would obviously have a very major impact on the livelihoods of all Kenyans and businessmen and other groups. But I do want to get away from this issue of the ICC and mention some other very important issues, which is, for example, the Tana River, where we've been talking about the violence there, and we're talking about the resource constraints that make communities sort of fight each other historically. This is not new. The scale of it is new, but these communities have fought over land, over pasture, etc. But potentially, the Tana River Delta is probably the agriculturally the richest part of Kenya. And we have numerous governments, including the government of Qatar, by the way, where you're based, who have leased 100,000 acres to grow agricultural products. Many other companies are in the same process. Okay. And therefore, this is very valuable land, and driving people out of the land means that land can be bought more cheaply by investors.
Let me bring Kipchumba in, because I want to explore
who will then sell it at a high price.
A little further. Kipchumba, Salim, they're saying that, you know, everybody portrays the problems in Kenya as deeply ethnic problems, but there are many other issues. There are land issues, access issues, education issues, infrastructure issues. There are a lot of election priorities there, aren't there?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, those who have not lived and experienced the life in this country have this misconception that we are ethnic animals who are ready to descend on each other anytime. But I really believe even the 2007 elections, post-election violence, was as a result of the results that came out which were not correct, so that, you know, people were acting on, as a result of injustice, and then perpetuating an argument that they were a group that was marginalized for a long time vis-a-vis those who are perceived to have benefited. So the biggest problem in this country is the question of equitable distribution of resources. And partly we have tried to solve that problem in our new constitution. We have devolved a system of government and expected that resources that are going to be devolved to the local level are going to benefit people in the local level. The paradox, however, is that in places like Tana River, for example, is that now ethnic supremacies and who controls the county could have perhaps be part of the reasons why there is this tension between the Ormas and the Pokomos. But what was expected what is expected from our constitution is that devolving resources is going to solve this problem. We have a National Land Commission that has been also created under the constitution that is going to investigate historical land injustices. And so we are hoping that under the new constitution, fully implemented, with a government that is willing to actually develop this nation, we are going to be able to solve the problems that are bedeviling this country. There is an assumption that we just hate each other for the sake of it. That is not true. The real problem is that there is governance vis-a-vis marginalization that has actually made people to feel that their neighbors or their friends or their communities vis-a-vis another community are fighting over particular resources. Okay,
let's just get some feedback on this subject that we've had via Facebook. David Amania says, I'm Kenyan and this part of Kenya is facing tribal animosities, is underdeveloped with a high percentage of illiteracy, no schools, no healthcare and no roads. Noura Mohammed Yaro says that the majority are killing themselves just for the selfish interest of the minority. And Roman Soiko simply says, not this again. Why can't Kenya host peaceful elections? Michael, are our guests correct in saying there is too much emphasis on ethnic issues and actually we should be looking at a host of other problems for the particular conflicts that we see in Kenya?
I think the focus on ethnic issues has been too much.
But hasn't that been fueled by the politicians themselves to a certain degree?
Oh yes, of course. I mean, each politician would want to manipulate, his ethnic background to his advantage. So you can expect that. However, you would realize that people are also going to be voting on issues as well as on ethnicity. So there are a lot of issues at play. But essentially, for this election, this will be the first election for the newly formed Electoral Commission. It's also going to be the first time in Kenyan history where it could go into a second round. And we're talking about a first round of just a simple majority, or perhaps at least 25% of votes cast across 24 counties. So that actually means that anyone can win within the first round and get away with it. And that's what raises the stakes for this particular election. And every politician is trying to be able to garner votes from anything that gets to their advantage. Uhuru Kenyatta is trying to get votes from his ethnic background as well as from the party base of his father. And of course, William Ruto is taking advantage of his breaking away from the current Prime Minister Raila Odinga. So basically, any form of opposition against Odinga goes automatically to Ruto and Kenyatta. And of course, Raila Odinga himself, being the Prime Minister, also has his own base as the incumbent. So
Michael, we're going to have to wrap it up there. So final thought on the future for Kenya, the elections for Kenya, peaceful one or not peaceful?
We hope that it will be peaceful. We hope that it will be peaceful. And I think that, bearing in mind that Kenyatta and Ruto were the culprits in the last ones, we're not expecting them to plan any violence this time. So we hope that it will be peaceful.
OK, let's leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me today. Salim Lone, Kipchumba Murkomen, both in Nairobi, and Michael Amoah in London. Now, if you have any comments or want to suggest issues we should be covering, send us your feedback. You can tweet me at Hackhound or email the programme at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Shiulie Gosh. Bye-bye for now.